Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Aleph, Daf 71 of Masechta Pesachim. It's a frigid morning over here on the east coast of the Golden Medina. Just thought I would let you know. Anyways, today we're going to discuss slaughtering the Shalmay Simcha on Erev Yom Tov. Right, so on the 14th of Nisan, can you slaughter Shalmay Simcha, the shlamim, the korbanos that you're going to be eating to be happy on the festival? Can you do that already from Erev Pesachim? Interestingly, we're going to see two conflicting opinions of Rebbe Lazar. Okay, and then how do we learn out the psul of lina for the aymurim hagigas tesvav? So if you have a regular korban hagiga, and that's brought on the 15th of Nisan, or also of Tishrei, I guess. And it can be brought throughout the holiday. So how do we know that the aymurim, the parts that go on the Mizbeach, if they don't go on the Mizbeach before the morning, that they are puzzle? And then we get to a new Mishnah at the end, and I believe it's going to be the last Mishnah of the parak, which discusses some details about Shechem the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, particularly about what happens when things go wrong. Alright, so we're going to start on Daf Ayin Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Amar Ula, Amar Rebbe Lazar, Shlamim sheshachton me'erev Yom Tov, en yotze ba'en lo mishum simcha v'lo mishum chagiga. So it says Ula, in the name of Rebbe Lazar, Shlamim sheshachton me'erev Yom Tov. Okay, so if you have a korban shlamim, okay, very good, and it's the 14th day of Nisan, and you slaughtered them, you can't say, oh, okay, this is great, I just slaughtered my korban shlamim, it's the 14th day of Nisan, why don't I just wait until tomorrow when it's let's say it's the 14th day of Nisan, so let's wait until the 15th day of Nisan, and I'll be able to enjoy this korban shlamim tomorrow on Yom Tov. It'll be Simchas Yom Tov. These will be Shalmay Simcha. Or let's say you say, you know what, I want this to be my korban hagiga. So that's not going to work. I mean, in the korban hagiga of the 15th, I mean the one that's part of the obligation of the holiday. So mishum simcha dichsev zavachta v'samachta binan zvicha b'shas simcha v'leka. Right. So the reason why this korban shlamim that you shechted on erev Pesach cannot work for your Shalmay Simcha is because the pasuk says v'zavachta v'samachta, that you will slaughter and you will be happy. But you specifically need that when it comes to Shalmay Simcha, the shlamim that you bring in order to be happy. As Rashi says on the last wide line of Rashi, Vein simcha ela b'achilas shlamim. There's no simcha except with eating korban shlamims. So you need the slaughtering of the Shalmay Simcha to be on the holiday, and over here it's before the holiday. It's Erev Pesach. So that would not work. Mishum chagiga, and the reason why it would not work to be yotze for your korban chagiga is habidavar shebechova. Well, because the korban chagiga that you bring on the holiday is an obligation. That on the holiday you have to bring a korban chagiga. Now, we had said yesterday that the chagiga was optional. That's referring to the chagigas yudalit, the korban chagiga that you bring as the main meal at the seder. This is talking about the hagigas tesvav, the korban hagiga that you have to bring on every holiday. So that's an obligation. And when you have an obligation, it has to come from chulin, from just regular animals, whereas this was a shlamim. So therefore it would not be able to be brought as your korban hagiga. Okay, very nice. So let's say that the following supports this opinion of Ula in the name of Rebbe Lazar. That it says on Sukkot that you will be happy. Which means that even on the last night of Yom Tov, the night of Shmini Atzeres, still you will have Shalmay Simcha. Wait a second. How do we know that when from the pasuk of Vayisach Sameach that you will be happy, that it's coming to include even the night, the last night of Yom Tov, even the night of Shmini Atzeres? Maybe it's coming to include even the first night of Sukkot, to say that you'll have shlamim that you're going to eat on the first night of Sukkot. Talmud ach chalek. Oh, so this is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this in the beginning of Masechta Pesachim. We saw this at the end of Masechta Eruvin. That ach, the word ach, is to make a distinction. It's a miut. It's to make a distinction. And therefore, since it says ach, which means to make a distinction, we want to assume that what it means is, well, it can only be referring to one of them, either the night of Shmini Atzeres or the night of the first night of Yom Tov, and we're going to choose that it means the night of Shmini Atzeres. How come? My time. Why are we choosing Shmini Atzeres versus the first night of Sukkot? Lab mishum de'en lo ba meyismach, and that is what we try to bring as a proof. Well, it must be because memele I won't have any Shalmay Simcha on the first night of Yom Tov, because when would I have slaughtered those Shalmay Simcha? I would have slaughtered them on Erev Yom Tov. But on Erev Yom Tov, I can't yet bring my Shalmay Simcha, because it has to be Bizman Simcha, it has to be on Yom Tov. So on Erev Yom Tov, I can't slaughter my Shalmay Simcha. And because I can't slaughter my Shalmay Simcha on Erev Yom Tov, I'm not going to have any Shalmay Simcha for the first night of Yom Tov. And Memele, when it says Vayisa Ach Sameach, and Ach is to make a miut, and to say that it can be either the last night of Yom Tov or the first night of Yom Tov, well, we're saying it includes the last night of Yom Tov, not the first night of Yom Tov, mistame, because, well, how can it possibly include the first night of Yom Tov? You would have had to have slaughtered it on Erev Yom Tov, and we seem to be assuming that that would not be allowed. So this would be a proof for Ula in the name of Rebbe Lazar that shlamim that were slaughtered on Erev Yom Tov cannot be used as Shalmay Simcha, because you need to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha during the time of Simcha, i.e. on the Yom Tov itself. Lo, that's not a good proof. The reason why we include the night of Shmini Atzeres and not the first night of Yom Tov, the first night of Sukkot, with Shalmay Simcha is because how come we are including the night of Shmini Atzeres in the Chiyuv of Shalmay Simcha and excluding the first night of Sukkot? Well, it makes sense to include the last night of Yom Tov, because leading up to the last night, there was Simcha for 7 days leading up to it. And I am going to exclude the first night of Sukkot, which doesn't have Simcha before then. Meaning, we have this pasuk of Vayisa Ach Sameach, and Ach means chalek, to divide, meaning we're only going to include either the last night of Yom Tov or the first night of Yom Tov. We have to choose. So it makes more sense to say that we're going to include the last night of Yom Tov, because after all, there was 7 days of Simcha leading up to it. It makes sense to also tack on that final night, one more night of Simcha. Whereas the first night of Sukkot, there is no Simcha leading up to it. It's first kicking things off, so I won't necessarily include it yet. Okay, but it's not necessarily a proof to say that the reason why we exclude night 1 is because you were unable to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha on Erev Pesach. That's not necessarily a proof. Okay. Moshe Rav Yosef asks Akasha, Chagigas Arba Aser Yotze Ba Mishum Simcha Ve'im Yotze Ba Mishum Chagiga. Okay. So Rav Yosef asks Akasha, and he says that we have this brisa that we saw yesterday. What does it say? It says that the Chagigas Arba Aser, the Chagiga that you bring on, that you offer on that you slaughter on the 14th day of Nisan, that you're going to be eating as the main course with before the Korban Pesach. Yotze Ba Mishum Simcha, you would be allowed, you'd be able to be Yotze, your Shalmay Simcha, with this Chagigas Yudalit, ve'en yotzei ba mishum chagiga. But you're not allowed, you won't be able to use the chagigas yudalid for your regular chagiga, for your chagigas tesvav. Now, Rav Yosef right now is assuming that what this means is that when you slaughter the hagigas yudalid, you can actually use it for your Shalmay simcha. Now, we had explained yesterday that that's not what it means. What it means is that if you didn't slaughter your chagigas yudalid, but you had set it aside to be your chagigas yudalid, but for whatever reason you didn't slaughter it, so then you would still be able to use it for Shalmay simcha. That's how we explained it yesterday. But Rav Yosef wants to assume that what it means that actually if you did slaughter your chagigas yudalid, you can nonetheless still use it for Shalmay simcha. So we see that you would be able to slaughter the Shalmay simcha before Yom Tif, even though it's not yet Zman simcha. B'shvek the Gemara, Amai. Why would that be allowed? Or really Rav Yosef saying, why would that be allowed? I thought, according to Ulan and Imra Belazar, that you need the slaughtering of the Shalmay simcha to be during the time of simcha, on the Chag itself. Yet we seem to be saying in this brisa that you're allowed to slaughter the chagigas, that you're allowed to slaughter the Shalmay simcha already on Erev Pesach. So says Rav Vidi Bar Oven, like we said yesterday, that, well, he didn't actually slaughter the chagigas yudalid on Erev Pesach. For whatever reason, he didn't slaughter the chagigas yudalid on Erev Pesach, and he only slaughtered it on Yom Tif. And what we're saying is the fact that he set it aside in advance doesn't make it unusable for the Shalmay simcha, which is not the case by Shalmay hagiga. Shalmay hagiga needs to come from chulin because it's an obligation, and since it's an obligation, it has to come from chulin. And since you set aside this animal to be your chagigas yudalid, you cannot use it for your chagigas tesvav. However, that does not apply to Shalmay simcha, and you'd be able to use this animal that you set aside to be chagigas yudalid, and for whatever reason you didn't use it on the 14th, and you didn't slaughter it on the 14th, so you can slaughter it, let's say on the 15th, and use it for Shalmay simcha. It says Rav Ashi that this actually makes sense to understand the brisa this way, that it's talking about where you didn't actually slaughter the chagigas yudalid on yudalid. Because if you don't say it like this, because if we remember from yesterday, who was actually the author of this brisa that says that you can use chagigas yudalid as your Shalmay simcha? The author of this brisa was Ben Tema. Ben Tema, apostle Abelina. Shmamino. Now Ben Tema, of course, was the opinion yesterday, who says that we compare the Korban Pesach. No, we compare the Chagigas Yudalid to the Korban Pesach, and just like the Korban Pesach by the next morning is possible, so also the Chagigas Yudalid by the next morning is possible, and therefore, since his brisa is Ben Tema, how could it possibly be saying that if you slaughtered the Chagigas Yudalid on the 14th day of Nisan, you can use it for the Shalmay simcha on the 15th day of Nisan? Once the morning comes, it's already going to be possible. So how can you do that? So rather, it must be that you did not slaughter the chagigas yudalid on yudalid, and we're saying that on the chag itself, on the holiday itself, on the festival itself, you can use this animal that you set aside to be chagigas yudalid. You could nonetheless use it for Shalmay simcha. Masiv Rava asks a kasha. Hahalav v'asimcha shmona. What's it, a Mishnah? That it says in Masechta Sukkah that Halal and Simcha is for all 8 days, right? The 7 days of Sukkot plus Shmini Atzeres. Now, v'yamar b'inyan zvicha b'shas Simcha. Now, if you say, like Ula is saying in the name of Rabbi Lazar, that when you slaughter the Shalmay Simcha, it has to be during the time of Simcha. It has to be on Yom Tif. Well, if that's the case, Hazimnin Sagiyin, so Rava asked, but how can we say in Masechta Sukkah that you have Simcha for 8 days, but if the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbos, you're not going to be bringing Shalmay Simcha, right? If we say that you davka need to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha b'shas Simcha on the festival. Now, if the first day of the festival is Shabbos, you're not going to be slaughtering the Shalmay Simcha on Shabbos, in which case the Simcha is only going to be for the remaining 7 days. So how could we say in Masechta Sukkah that Simcha is for 8 days, if that's not necessarily always going to be the case? If the first day of Yom Tov is Shabbos, you're not going to be slaughtering the Shalmay Simcha on Shabbos, and you're only going to have 7 days of Simcha. Amar Rav Huna Breder of Yehuda Mesamcho B'tzir HaRegalim. So Rav Huna Breder of Yehuda says that, well, even in cases where you cannot slaughter the Shalmay Simcha on Yom Tov because it's Shabbos, well, you still have the Seirei HaRegalim. Right? You're going to offer korbanos. Right? There's going to be korbanos, public korbanos, on the first day of the Yom Tov. So you have these Seirei Chatas that are offered on the first day of Yom Tov. So even if it's Shabbos. So since you have those korbanos, so that would be enough to be considered Simchas Yom Tov with the korban musafs. Amar Rava shtei tshuvas badavar. Rava says, yeah, but come on, Rav Huna Breder of Yehuda. That's not a good substitute for Shalmay Simcha. Chada, question number one, question number one is that these Seirei Chatas that will be offered on the first day of Sukkot, even if it's Shabbos, those are eaten raw, which is very interesting. That if you have these korbanos that are offered on Shabbos, so while you could slaughter them and put them on the Mizbeach, you can't necessarily roast the meat and eat them on Shabbos. And therefore, if the Kohanim want to eat this korban chatas, this Seirei chatas, they're going to have to eat it raw. V'simcha b'chayleka, and that's not going to be considered Simchas Yom Tov by eating this raw meat. Interesting, because the korban chatas, there are certain parts that go on the Mizbeach and the rest goes to the Kohanim. V'od, and question number two, Kohanim ochlim v'yisrael b'mesmeichim. And question number two, says Rava, is that while the Kohen, even if you want to say that sure, eating raw meat could be considered Simchas Yom Tov, but that's really only Simchas Yom Tov for the Kohen. What about for the rest of Am Yisrael? So how could we say in Sukkah that there's Simchas Yom Tov for all 8 days if we're saying that the Shalmay Simcha have to be slaughtered on Yom Tov? Well, if they can't be slaughtered on Yom Tov, it falls out on Shabbos, well then, often enough, it's not going to be 8 days, it's going to be 7 days. So, Ela Amar Papa, Misamcho B'chsus Nekiya V'yayin Yosham. Says Rav Papa that actually, the way that you have Simchas Yom Tov in that case, when the first day of Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, and you can't have any Shalmay Simcha, so in that case, you have Simchas Yom Tov B'chsus Nekiya, with clean clothing, V'yayin Yosham, and drinking old wine. That is how you can have Simchas Yom Tov, even without Shalmay Simcha. Interesting. So now, interestingly, we're going to see the opinion of Ravin in the name of Rebbe Lazar, which is completely, pretty much opposite to what Ula says in the name of Rebbe Lazar. So let's see. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rebbe Lazar, Shlom Sheshachtan Erev Yom Tiv. So if you have a korban shlomim that you slaughtered on Erev Yom Tiv, Yotzei Boen Mishum Simcha, Ve'en Yotzei Boen Mishum Hagiga. So you can be Yotzei, you can use this Shalmay, you can use these shlamim that you shechted on Erev Yom Tiv for your Shalmay Simcha on Yom Tiv, even though you slaughtered them before the festival. But you would not be able to use this shlamim for your hagiga that you need to bring on the festival. Yotze mishum simcha, so you can be yotze with the shlamim that you slaughtered for Shalmay Simcha, lo ba'inun zvicha b'shas simcha, because says Ravin in the name of Rebbe Lazar that you do not need to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha during the time of Simcha. You can even slaughter them on the eve of the festival. V'lo mishum chagiga, and you cannot use these shlamim for your chagiga because avidav shebechova, because the chagiga is an obligatory korban. V'chodav shebechova eno ba'el min achulin, and any obligatory korbanos have to come from chulin, whereas this animal was already set aside for a shlamim. Okay? Meisve, but we have a kasha. It's going to be the same kasha that we asked earlier. Vayisach sameach, that it says you have to be happy on Sukkot. The Rabbos le'yom tov ha'achron l'simcha. And we're saying that includes the last day of the last night of Chag, i.e. the night of Shmini Atzeres, for Simcha. How do we know that it's coming to include the last night of Yom Tov? Maybe it's coming to include the first night of Yom Tov. Well, that's why it says Vayisa ach sameach. Ach is the lashon of miyut, to divide, that we can only include either the last night of Yom Tov or the first night of Yom Tov. My time. So how come we decide to include the last night of Yom Tov and not the first night of Yom Tov? Lab mishum de'en lo bama yismach. Is it not because on the first night of Yom Tov, practically speaking, how are you going to be misameach? There's no Shalmay simcha. You couldn't have slaughtered them on Erev Yom Tov. So therefore, practically speaking, that's why we cannot include the first night of Yom Tov for Simcha. So we see that you're not allowed to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha before the festival starts. So how could Rabban be saying in the name of Rabbi Lazar that if you slaughter a shlamim on Erev Yom Tov, you can use it for Shalmay Simcha? It sounds like from this brayso that you cannot. So the Gemara says, "Lo, that is not the reason why we include the last night of Yom Tov and exclude the first night of Yom Tov. Rather, Kedetanya, it's like we learn in the brayso, Marisa the Rabbos le Yom Tov ha'achron u'lohotzi le Yom Tov ha'rishon. How come we include the last night of Yom Tov and exclude the first night of Yom Tov? My bani le Yom Tov ha'achron sheish simcha lefanov. Well, I'll include the last night of Yom Tov because there was 7 days of simcha leading up to it. Umotzani le Yom Tov ha'rishon she'en simcha lefanov, and I'll exclude the first night of Yom Tov, which doesn't have a whole bunch of simcha leading up to it. But it's not necessarily a proof to say that you're not allowed to slaughter the Shalmay Simcha on Erev Yom Tov. Alright? Fine. Omer Rav Kana, says Rav Kana, Minayin le'mur hagigas chamisha aso shenusalim belina. So asks Rav Kahana, how do we know that the specified parts of the hagigas chamisha aso? So if you have the Shalmay hagiga, so you have a shlamim for the hagiga, right? This obligatory offering that you bring for every festival. So the parts of the animal that go on the mizbeach, so how do we know that if you didn't put them up on the mizbeach by the morning that they are pasul? So Shenemar, as the pasuk says, V'lo yolin chelev chag yad boker. Well, it says, do not leave over the fats of my korban chagiga until the morning. V'samachle, and it says reishis, right? It says in the very next pasuk, it says reishis b'kuyad mascho tavi beis Hashem l'kech lo svash gedi b'chalivimo. So because it says reishis in the second, in the very next pasuk, so l'meimer dai boker boker rishon, says Rav Kahana, that is how we know that when we talk about, when it says lo yolin chelev chag yad boker, do not leave the fats of my korban chagiga until the morning, that is how we know that it's referring to the first morning, i.e. the very next morning, that at that point it will become pasul. So now, Maskifla Rav Yosef. So if Yosef asks a question, time the cost of reishis, hello cost of reishis, havamina my boker sheni. Now Rav Yosef asks a question. He says, 1 second, Rav Kahana. So okay, we're talking about chagigas tezvav, right? Which means that you're slaughtering it on the first day of Yom Tov. Now you can eat it for 2 days, right? You can eat it for, so if you slaughter it on the 15th, so you can eat it. Let's just say it's talking about Nisan. So if you slaughter it on the 15th, so you can eat it on the 15th, you can eat it on the 16th, right? Shnei yom v'layla echad, you can eat it on the 15th and the 16th and the night in between. Okay. And Rav Kahana is saying that we learn out because it says reishis, it means the first morning, which means that when you slaughter the chagiga on the 15th, so already on the morning of the 16th, if the aymurim were not yet burned on the mizbeach, then they're going to be pasul, as opposed to the morning of the 17th, right? Meaning the first morning after it was slaughtered, i.e. the 16th, at that point they're pasul, but they cannot wait, but not the following morning, which would be the 17th. Fine. Now, Rav Kahana learns it out because it says, right, v'lo yolin chelev chag yad boker, and then immediately it says reishis. Reishis means first, so therefore it means don't leave the aymurim over till the first morning, the morning of the 16th. Fine. Rav Yosef asks a question. He says, but if that's the case, if not for the fact that it says reishis havamina my boker sheni, if not for the fact that it says Reishis, I would have thought by default that it would be referring to the second morning, to the morning of the 17th. Says Rav Yosef, do we ever have a precedent for a korban that you can right, they can no longer eat the meat of it, but you could still burn the aymurim, right? Meaning, if we would say that you can burn the aymurim of the korban hagiga until the second morning, well, that would be the morning of the 17th, and therefore you can eat the korban hagiga on the 15th, you can eat the korban hagiga on the 16th, and then, but comes the night following the 16th, you can no longer eat the korban chagiga, yet we're saying that you can still burn its aymurim until the next morning. Is there ever a situation where you can no longer eat the meat, yet you can still burn the aymurim? So Amalei Abaye, alam alo. Abaye says, yeah, why not? Vari Pesach, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the basu ifsalei mechatzos ve'aymurim atzafra. What about the korban Pesach according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? We learned on Daf Tes of Masechta Brachos. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that you can only eat the korban Pesach until chatzos, and yet you could burn the aymurim until the morning. So yeah, we do have a precedent for a korban that while you can no longer eat the meat, you could still burn the aymurim. So Rav Yosef, that's not necessarily a good question. So Amar Ravos. Now Rava comes to explain Rav Yosef, and we're going to kind of go on like a roundabout kind of way to finally explain Rav Yosef's question. We're going to like bring all sorts of brises, and some parts are going to kind of make sense, some parts are going to kind of, let's say, be more loose, but ultimately we're going to get to a question. Here we go. Amar Rava, Rav Yosef achi kokashele. This is what Rav Yosef was asking. Mi'ika midi de ilutana lebasar lo vayireshis, Rav Kana lemurin vayireshis. Okay. That is Rav Yosef's question, and now we're going to go about explaining what it means. So Rava explains that Rav Yosef's question is the following: that meat is considered more lenient than the aymurim. The aymurim are more strict than the meat is. Now, Rav Yosef's question is, how could it be possible that we have a brisa in which we assume that the meat would be able to be eaten until the first morning? I'm sorry, that for the meat we don't need the word reshit in order to know that it refers to the first morning. And how could it be that Rav Kahana is saying that, but by the aymurim we need the word reshit in order to tell me that it means the first morning, and if not for the fact reshit, then I wouldn't know that it means the first morning. I would think that would be more lenient and leave it till the second morning. Right? How could it be that the Tana assumes that even without the word reshit, by meat it refers to the first morning, and yet by aymurim, which is more chamor, Rav Kahana seems to be arguing that if not for the fact that it says reshit, I would think that it means the second morning. How could it be that we're treating aymurim more stringently than the meat? And here comes the sort of explanation. Mahi, what are we talking about? Titania is learning a brayso. Lo yalim min abasar asher tizbach be'erev bayom rishon laboker. Okay, the pasuk says that do not leave over from the meat that you will slaughter on the eve of the first day until the morning. Okay. Limed teaches a hagiga yudalit. Okay, so it teaches us about the hagiga that you bring on the 14th as the main course of the Seder. That it can be eaten for 2 days in the night in between, like we learned in the Mishnah yesterday. Wait. Maybe it means that you're only allowed to eat the hagiga yudalit for the day that it's slaughtered and the following night until the next morning, but no more than that. Well, shu omer bayom harishon hari boker sheni amor. Meaning when it says, right, bayom harishon laboker, so bayom harishon would be day 1 and laboker would be day 2. Wait, oenu ella boker rishon. No, maybe boker means the first morning. Mani mekayim chagiga hanecheles l'shnei v'la le'echad chutz mizo. But one second, there seems to be a place where we seem to be referring to some korban chagiga that is eaten for 2 days and the night in between. As we see, Kshu Omer, when the pasuk says, V'im nedro nedava, in the context of a korban shlamim, it says that if you have a shlamim that's brought as like a pledge, that you pledge to bring a korban shlamim, and there's an extra word there, it says ve'im, which we learn out, that it teaches about a korban chagiga that's eaten for 2 days and the night in between. Well, if we say that this pasuk is referring to only 1 day and the following night, well then what is that hagiga that we're talking about in that other pasuk that's talking about 2 days and the night in between? Okay, I know it's kind of weird. Let's keep on going with this weirdness. Amar Mai, we said earlier, O eno ela boker rishon. Okay, so we suggested that maybe this pasuk is referring to that this korban chagiga you can only eat until the first morning. Ha'amr kshu omer bayom harishon hari boker sheni amor. But then we said, wait, but when it says bayom harishon laboker, it's talking about the second morning. Okay, hachikam, this is what it means. Maybe this pasuk of is maybe talking about 2 korban chagigas, not just 1 korban chagiga, 2 korban chagigas. Achas chagigas yudalet, v'achas chagigas tesvav. One of them being the chagigas yudalet, the korban chagiga that you bring on Erev Pesach to have with your meal at the Seder, and the other one to bring the korban chagiga that you bring on the festival. V'zola boka, and each one has 1 day. You can eat it for a day and a night, but by the next morning, it's going to be pasul. So the chagigas yudalet will be pasul on the morning of the 15th, and the chagigas tesvav will be pasul on the morning of the 16th. Okay. Hadar Amar, but then we said, wait a second. But but we said one second, but from this pasuk of Imneder Nedava, we learn out that there seems to be some kind of korban chagiga that could be eaten for 2 days and the night in between. But we just said, right, but based on what we just said, we wanted to say that this pasuk is referring to both the chagigas yudalit and the chagigas tezvav, and we're saying that each one it's only until the following morning. But you don't have 2 days and the night in between. But we seem to have this pasuk of Imneder Nedava that says that there's some korban chagiga that can be eaten for 2 days and the night in between. So what's that? So rather, and now here is we're finally going to sort of close in on how this is a question. Is Ella hay lechagigas tezvav hay kulei kra lechagigas yudalid. Rather, when it says V'imneder Nedava, and it says that you have 2 days and the night in between, it's referring to the chagiga of the festival, chagigas tesvav. And the first pasuk of Lo Yalin min abasa shetizmach ba'er b'yom harishon laboker, that is talking about the chagigas yudalid. Limer chagigas yudalid shnechel shniyom v'lad echad, which therefore teaches that the chagigas yudalid is eaten for 2 days and the night in between. Time of the chsiv bayom harishon laboker to my boker sheni. Now, how do we know that you can eat the chagigas yudalit for 2 days? The meat of the chagigas yudalit you can eat for 2 days. Well, specifically because it says boker. Well, it says bayom harishon laboker. So because it says bayom harishon, which refers to the first day, and laboker, which refers to the second day, that is how we know that boker is referring to the second day, but boker alone would refer to the first day, right? So do my boker sheni hakolecha dichsev boker stama, but if all it would say is boker rishon, v'afagad l'kosa b'reishis, even though it doesn't say reishis, and therefore, so what do we see from this whole roundabout brisa? What we see is that when it comes to the chagigas yudalid, I know that you can eat the meat for 2 days and the night in between because it says layom harishon laboker. That because it says bayom harishon and it says laboker, so yom harishon is day 1, laboker is day 2. But if it wouldn't have said yom harishon, so then boker alone would just mean 1 day, which means that when it says boker alone, it means that you can eat the meat for 1 day. Now, if by the meat we're going to say that boker limits it to 1 day, so then memele the aymurim, which are more chamer than the meat, when it says boker, I would assume that it means 1 day. So that's Rav Yosef's question on Rav Kahana, why are you assuming that we know that the aymurim of the hagiga are possible on the first day, on the morning of the following morning, because it says reishis following boker, assuming that, right, implying that if it didn't say reishis, then I would assume that boker would be the second morning, but we just assumed that the meat of the hagiga can be eaten for 2 days only because it says Yom HaRishon and Boker, implying that if it didn't say Yom HaRishon, so then Boker would be referring to the first day, Memela. So then I should assume that the aymurim, which are more chamor, so when it says Boker there, even without the word reishis, I should assume that it's referring to the first morning. That explains Rava, is Rav Yosef's question on Rav Kahana. And we don't resolve it. We just leave it as a very sort of well built up, well, I don't know if the word well is good, but a very built up question with sort of some, you had to kind of trust the process along the way. Alright, very nice. Okay, and says this Mishnah, HaPesach sheshachto shelo lishmo b'Shabbos chayav olav chatos. Okay, so if you have a korban Pesach, and the 14th day of Nisan is Shabbos, so you shechting the korban Pesach on Shabbos, okay, shelo lishmo, and you slaughter it for it to be a shlamim. Okay, so you can be chayav a korban chatas because you're only allowed to slaughter a korban Pesach. Right? Pesach is docha Shabbos. Now, if you shech the korban Pesach l'shem shlamim, it's possible. So you did something possible, so it's going to be you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. So shar kol azvachim sheshachton l'shem Pesach. If you slaughter some other, if you slaughter, let's say, a shlamim on erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos, but you have the intention of a korban Pesach. Okay, so if it's something that you are unable to bring as a korban Pesach, well, then certainly you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. For example, if you slaughter a cow as a korban Pesach on Shabbos, erev Pesach, certainly you're going to be chayav a korban chatas, assuming, of course, they did it by accident. But if it's something that's fit, so like let's say you had a korban shlamim that was a sheep, and it could theoretically be a korban Pesach, but it was set aside as a shlamim, and you shechted it, the shem korban Pesach, on erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos. So Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas, Rabbi Yeshua poter. So Rabbi Eliezer says you're going to be chayev a korban chatas. Rabbi Yeshua says you're going to be poter. Okay, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, Ma'ima Pesach shu muter l'shmo. If you have a korban Pesach that you're allowed to shecht it on Shabbos erev Pesach, kishashina shmo chayev, yet if you slaughter it with the wrong intention, i.e. to be a shlamim, so then we say that you're chayev. So Kilu, you started out with something permitted. You're allowed to shecht the korban Pesach on Shabbos, but then you changed your intention to be for shlamim, and then it becomes possible. Well, if you have, let's say, a korban shlamim, which you're not allowed to slaughter a korban shlamim, you're starting out already in a place where you're of Isser, that you're not allowed to slaughter a korban shlamim on Shabbos. So kshashina eshman, when you then, not only are you doing something that you're not allowed to, you're also having the wrong intention when you do it. And din she'eh chayev, certainly you're going to be chayev a korban chatas. Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer, Lom amar b'Pesach sheshineu b'davar aser. Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Eliezer and he says, you can't compare those two. When it comes to korban Pesach, that you shechted it l'shem shlamim on Shabbos, of course you can be chayav a korban chatas. You changed it to something that isn't allowed. Yeah, sure, you're allowed to slaughter a korban Pesach on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to slaughter a korban shlamim on Shabbos, and therefore you changed your mind from something that is allowed to something that isn't allowed. So of course you're going to be chayav. But Tomar bezvachim sheshinam b'davar amutar. But you're going to say the same logic when it's the other way around. When you have a shlamim, which sure, you're not allowed to slaughter a korban shlamim on Shabbos, but what you did was you changed your intention to be something that you're allowed to do on Shabbos, a korban Pesach. So it says Rabbi Yeshua, in that case you're going to be poter. Amar Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer responds to Rabbi Yeshua, but what about the aymurim over here is not referring to the specified parts of the animal. It's talking about the korbanos hane'emru b'tzibur, the korbanos of the tzibur, right? So what about, like, for example, a korban tamid in the Beis HaMikdash that they would offer on Shabbos, shein mutarin lishman, that you're allowed to offer a korban tamid in the Beis HaMikdash or a korban musaf in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, yet If you were to slaughter a korban shlamim with the intention of a korban tamid on Shabbos, it would not be allowed. So we see that, well, in that case, you have something that you're not allowed, and you do it with the intention of something that is allowed, and we're saying chayiv, you're going to be chayiv a korban chata. So, Rabbi Yeshua, shouldn't the same thing be over here on Erev Pesach? If you slaughter a shlamim, the shem Pesach, something that isn't allowed with the intention of something that is allowed, you should also be chayiv a korban chata. So, Amar Rabbi Yeshua says you can't compare the korban Pesach to the korban tamid on Shabbos. Lo amar be'aymurim tzibur sheish lahen kitzba. Tamar Pesach shein lo kitzba. The aymurim tzibur, right? The korban tamid on Shabbos is a lot more manageable and measurable than the korban Pesach, right? We said the other day that one year they had 12 million korban Pesachs going on. We said that Kohanim are wading through blood up to their knees. I mean, it's a whole mess what's going on over there, right? Whereas on a regular Shabbos, it's much more manageable. And therefore, in that case, where it's much more manageable, if you made a mistake and you, if for whatever reason you shechted a korban shlamim for a korban tamid, that is going to be a problem. You're going to be chayiv. But in this case, where there's so much going on, you accidentally slaughtered korban shlamim with the intention of korban Pesach in this whole mess. And Rashi points out, like, it could even be a situation where he had, have a person who set aside two korbanos, one to be a shlamim, one to be a Pesach, and there's just so much going on. He made a mistake. He slaughtered the shlamim for a Pesach. There's so much going on Erev Pesach. So in that case, he shechted something that you're not allowed, but with the intention of something that you are allowed. So then, argues Rabbi Yeshua that he would be pater. And don't bring me a proof from just a regular Shabbos when there's just like two korbanos that need to be offered. It's much different. Rabbi Meir Omer Afashochet L'Shem Aymurim Tzibur Pater. Says Rabbi Meir, actually, even if you slaughter korban shlamim with the intention of a korban tamid or a korban musaf on Shabbos, even that would be pater. Shachtu Shelo Ochlav. If you slaughter a korban Pesach on Shabbos with the intention of people who are unable to eat it because they're sick, or they can't eat it because their teeth aren't good, they're old. V'shelo Limnuyav. Or if you slaughter for people that weren't part of the group, la'arein, for the tmein, for people that are bris milah, for people that are impure, chayiv. So you can be chayiv a korban chatas because it's not a good shchita, as we learned, a few days ago that if you shecht for the korban pesach for these people, it's possible. The ochlav v'shelo la'ochlav. But if you slaughter the korban pesach on Shabbos for a group of people consisting of people that can eat it as well as people that cannot eat it, l'mnuyav v'shelo l'mnuyav. Some people that are part of the group, some people that aren't part of the group. The mulim v'la'arelim, people with the bris milah, people without a bris milah, the tmeim v'the people that are impure, people that are pure, pater. In that case, you're pater from korban chatas because the shchita is kshera. It's a group consisting of both types of people. We said that would be okay. Shachtov v'nimtza ba'amum chayiv. If you slaughter the korban pesach on Shabbos and then it turns out, oops, it has a mum, well, you should have checked it before Shabbos and therefore you can be chayiv a korban chatas. Shachtov v'nimtza treifa b'seiser pater. So if you slaughtered it and it turns out that it's going to be a treifa, that it would have had some kind of a disease, well, if it was in an internal part of the animal where you couldn't have known this in advance, well, then you're going to be pater. If you slaughter the korban pesach and then find out, or let's say you're slaughtering the korban pesach for somebody, and then you find out that the whole group abandoned and broke up and joined other groups. Oh, shemesu, or the owners died. Oh, shenitmu, or they became impure, now they can't eat it. Pater, in all these cases, you're pater mipnei sheshachat b'shus, because you slaughtered the korban pesach with permission. You only found out afterwards that the group disbanded or whatever. Okay, well, that was daf Ayin Aleph of Masechta Pesachim. Let's see, what did we discuss? So we discussed slaughtering the Shalmay, Simcha, and Erev Yom Tov. Interestingly, we had two conflicting opinions of Rebbe Lazar. One from Ula, who said that if you slaughter a shlamim on Erev Pesach, you cannot use it for Shalmay, on Erev Yom Tov, you cannot use it for Shalmay Simcha, because the slaughtering of the Shalmay Simcha has to be b'shas Simcha, not on Erev Chag. Ravin says in the name of Rabbi Lazar that actually you can even slaughter the Shalmay Simcha on Erev Chag, because you don't need the slaughtering of the Shalmay Simcha to be during the time of Simcha. You can even do it on the eve of the festival. Then Rav Kahana said this, made this argument that we know that when it comes to hagigas tesvav, the korban hagiga that you bring on the festival, that the aymurim, the parts that go on the mizbeach, if you didn't put them on the mizbeach, so then they become pasul by the next morning. So Rav Kahana says that we know that because it says la boker and then it says reishis, so therefore it means the first boker. Rav Yosef asks the kasha, says, what do you mean? If it wouldn't have said reishis, we wouldn't know that it means the first boker. When it comes to the meat of the korban chagiga, we assume that it means the second boker only because it says yom harishon and boker, but boker alone would mean the first boker. Aymurim, which are more chamer, certainly even without reishit, I would know that it means that it becomes possible by the first boker. Okay, that was Rav Yosef's kasha and Rav Kahana. And then we got into this, and then we learned a new Mishnah at the end, which taught us that when we shech the korban pesach on Shabbos, we have to make sure that we do it right, because if we do it wrong and there's some kind of psul, whether you had the wrong intention or doing it for the wrong people or whatever it is, well then he's going to be chayav to bring a korban chatas for violating Shabbos. Alright, well, that was Daf Ayin Aleph. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.